Story 1. My family was very poor, and before high school I needed new glasses. The few frames available within my parents' budget included one that looked like safety glasses, one with oversized lenses that seemed straight out of the 70s or 80s, and a frame with circular lenses that I chose. Throughout my entire high school journey, my nickname was Potter. Even when I got new frames in my senior year, I was still called Potter. Story 2. Not me, my wife. She's 5 feet 1 inch and small all around. We met when she was 19. Her breasts were small, perfectly shaped, and gorgeous. I affectionately nicknamed her Tiny Tits, which quickly morphed into TT, and eventually got shortened to just T. She's 70 now, and after having 3 children long ago, her breasts aren't tiny anymore. But I still call her T, even after all these years, and she loves it. Story 3. In 7th grade, I projectile vomited at a very crowded party, and people were almost trampling each other to get away. I was nicknamed the Barf Master, and that followed me through high school for 5 years. I thought it was over, but it happened again at my 10-year reunion. Sincerely, the Barf Master. Story 4. At 2 to 3 years old, I began to dress myself. Trying to show off my newfound skill, I put on my sister's pink dress, as she was just a year older. My older cousins started calling me Minnie Mouse, as Minnie was somewhat close to my middle name, and it stuck. I'm a guy. Story 5. Not me, but one of my best friends. I was in university when that meme about daddy's cummies was all the rage around 10 years ago. Hopefully, someone knows what I'm talking about because I'm not going to search for that. But it was really popular for about a week. We were at a laid-back house party, and a few people were joking about cummies when my friend, who was 19 at the time, joined the conversation without context. I guess she thought we were talking about gummies, as in the chewy candy. She said, "I could really go for some gummy bears right now." Thus, she became known as Cummy Bear forever after. Story 6. I got on a roller coaster. At the end of the ride, the seat did not release. Maintenance was called. Attendants announced over the intercom that due to technical difficulties, the ride would need to be shut down. I am still experiencing technical difficulties 20 years later and get blamed anytime a ride goes down while we are in line. Story 7. A random girl at my school whom I didn't know loudly said to me in the lunchroom one day, "I've decided I'm going to call you Peaches." 20 years later, many of my friends still call me Peaches. All of their parents call me Peaches. Random people I run into at Walmart call me Peaches. Even the sheriff called me Peaches a couple of years ago during a roadblock. People laugh and ask, "So why do they call you Peaches?" It's not really a cool story. Another instance is when I met my daughter's dad at a fast food restaurant, and he saved my number in his phone as McAsshole. 15 years later, I'm still in his phone and called McAsshole by him and his friends. Story 8. Not me, but 10 years ago, my mom's friend had a little dog named Kai. Nothing happened to him, yet the other kids nicknamed him Mr. Roadkill because he sometimes walked into the street. Our cat was named Bear because, according to my dad, he looked like a little black bear cub as a kitten. Story 9. I received the nickname Stinky once for causing a particularly unpleasant odor in someone else's house. I can't live that story down. Story 10. Zipperhead ran down the stairs and clipped my head on an overhang. The doctor used staples, and that nickname stuck with me. A close second is Dad. Story 11. It wasn't even my mistake. I have a foreign name, and a substitute teacher in middle school mispronounced my name so badly that my friends still call me by it to this day. I am in college. Story 12. Wasn't my mistake, but when I was a child, one of my parents had to sign a field trip form. My dad decided to sign and misspelled my name as Jabub. Of course, it's Jacob. My mom still calls me that after almost 20 years. I also wanted to be called Jack for a while, yes, without a C. I shortly switched back, but my friend still calls me that. Story 13. We had to take showers in middle school. Puberty, hormones, and being a boy made it challenging. I tried to think of anything to distract myself. Homework, my grandmother, getting a cavity filled, but nothing worked. The erection overshadowed everything. Throbbing, why throbbing? My best friend was overweight. We were known as Fatman and Throbbin. Although cruel, kids can also be quite clever. Story 14. Not long ago, I was watering some plants with a friend and didn't realize there was a rectangular opening in the top of the watering can. The can was completely full, and when I picked it up, I spilled about half of it on myself. Now, that friend calls me squishy. Story 15. I just started my job, and one of my bosses called and asked, "Is this Natalie?" I panicked and said yes, even though, as far as I know, no one named Natalie has ever worked there, and it is nowhere close to my name. My coworkers still call me Natalie. Story 16. Nickname. Spaghetti. Reason for nickname. I tripped while carrying a full plate of pasta at a family barbecue and landed face first. The plate didn't survive. Story 17. A good friend called for me in the changing room of a public swimming pool. "Help! My sock is gone." Fairy used to be my nickname before that. After this event, all my friends called me Fairy My Sock Is Gone for years. Story 18. Sophomore year, we had to do a presentation on dental anatomy. I decided to stand out by dressing as a tooth, creating a DIY tooth costume made of couch foam, duct tape, and pure chaos. I even taped little angry eyes on it and called myself the Cavity Crusader. Mid-presentation, I tripped over a power cord, face planted into a skeleton model, and brought the entire display crashing down with me. Foam bits were flying, and with a skeleton arm in hand, I yelled, "Save your molars!" as I scrambled to get up. Ever since, I've been known as Toothnado. Honestly, I've learned to embrace the legend. Story 19. The Gimp, before Pulp Fiction, refers to a time when I broke my foot while drunk and had a walking cast for several weeks. My car was the Gimpmobile. Story 20. Not mine, but I love it, so I'll share. Baghdad. Is he from Iraq? No. Has he been to Iraq? No. Does he look Iraqi? No. One day, his dad bought him a new school bag, and he showed it off to his friends. "Look at my new bag. My dad bought it for me." 30 years later, he is still called Baghdad. Story 21. One of our delivery managers has been labeled Orphan Slayer because he disguised a group of homunculi as orphans and used them to open a hell portal. Story 22. My name is Nick, and I was talking with my coworkers about how I was about to become Unkai Nick. One of my coworkers suddenly turned the corner and yelled, "Did you say Monkey Dick?" Story 23. 14 years old, at summer camp. They found me eating pizza leftovers in the fridge and chasing cats. Then I was relieved. Kept it. I love it. Story 24. Once my friend and I were discussing the book Morphine by Bulgakov and its main character. Instead of writing the word doctor, I mistakenly wrote vrachla. I'll leave it in my native language because this word simply does not exist. For some time after that, I practiced as a paramedic, and among acquaintances and friends, this nickname stuck to me. In my native language, this word sounds similar to both doctor and a colloquial term for masturbate, which makes the nickname quite funny. However, I sometimes dislike it. Story 25. I have always been socially awkward, and my go-to was making jokes about violence. I have joked about knives with some people for over 20 years. Story 26. A backpacker is traveling through Ireland when it starts to rain. He decides to wait out the storm in a nearby pub. The only other person at the bar is an older man staring at his drink. After a few moments of silence, the man turns to the backpacker and says in a thick Irish accent, "You see this bar? I built this bar with my own bare hands. I cut down every tree and made the lumber myself. I toiled away through the wind and cold. But do they call me McGregor the bar builder? No," he continued. "Do you see that stone wall out there? I built that wall with my own bare hands. I found every stone and placed them just right through the rain and the mud. But do they call me McGregor the wall builder? No. Do you see that pier out there on the lake? I built that pier with my own bare hands, driving each piling deep into the ground so that it would last a lifetime. Do they call me McGregor the pier builder? No. But you mess with one goat." Story 27. I went to a private boarding school, starting during my junior year. I was messing around with some other students before dinner. One had a cigarette lighter that resembled a gun, and I held it up to my face while pretending to be like James Bond. One guy I didn't know well saw me and told everyone I looked like Anthony Perkins in Psycho. He then acted out the shower scene for a group of onlookers, ending by saying, "He ripped the curtain off and went chop, chop, chop." People started calling me that. I made it worse by approaching that student the following day and saying, "Chop, chop, chop." After that, I was known as Chopper, Chop Shop, or just Chop. Being a transfer student familiar with social norms, I tried to suppress that nickname, but it didn't work. Even teachers called me Chop. I went to college afterward and was assigned another nickname, but it wasn't as good as Chop. Most of my high school friends are gone now, so it's pretty rare when someone calls me that, but it does happen once in a while. Chop. Story 28. I didn't really do anything to deserve it, but my nickname is Lurch, like the character from the Addams Family. The only reason it stuck is that I am quiet, tall, and have a somewhat deep voice. Story 29. Not me, but when I was younger, I knew three guys with unusual nicknames. There was Captain Black, who was not black, he just didn't bathe. Then there was Cheese, who also didn't bathe. Last but not least was Puke, who did bathe but got drunk at a party and ended up vomiting on himself while naked in front of everyone. The South can be rough. Story 30. Mr. 300 went to Spearmint Rhino. He was told one dance was $20. She kept asking if he wanted her to keep dancing. He said yes, not realizing that each time she asked was considered one dance. He ended up paying a total of $300. Story 31. It was a really hot day when I arrived at work and drank an icy cold soda. I clutched my chest and collapsed. Emergency medical technicians were called, and I was unconscious for about 30 seconds. A huge gas bubble in my throat apparently caused my blood pressure to drop. I was known as Flatline for the rest of my time there. As a bonus, we discovered that you cannot fit a gurney in the elevator without standing it on end, with me strapped to it. Story 32. I worked at a lumber company that made redwood flower pots and planter boxes, and we would stain them with a color called burnt sienna. When I was hired, my boss told me not to wear any nice clothes because the stain would ruin them. I had a shirt that was a comic design featuring a golfer and various golf tools. It was a cool shirt, and it was titled The Putter. I wore that shirt for about a week and got the nickname Putter. I really disliked that name, but it stuck with me for the 7 years I worked there. Story 33. When I was in middle school, my mom and her old best friend had to pick me up from a sleepover because I got into a physical altercation with one of the girls there. My mom's friend called me Tita Puncher for a long time after that, and people still occasionally call me it. Story 34. My college roommate walked in on me squirting honey into my mouth from a honey bear bottle. Say what you want, but I love honey. I always have since I was a kid. I was having a stressful day and just wanted to make tea with honey when I got back to the dorm room. When I returned, I realized I was out of tea, so I decided to squirt some honey into my mouth. Of course, that was the moment she walked in. She started laughing and said, "What the heck, Lynn?" I explained that I wanted tea with honey but didn't have any tea. She remarked that I acted like Winnie the Pooh due to the way I consume honey, and from that moment on, she said she would call me Linny Pooh. I wasn't sure how to react, but I didn't mind. She's an awesome person, and it's nice to have a nickname. Then she told our dorm mates, acquaintances, and even the campus police about my new nickname. I would be walking across campus and hear, "Linny Pooh." That was over 20 years ago, and the nickname has stuck with me through jobs and new friends. My best friend, my college roommate, often tells me that we will be together in a nursing home when we are old, and she will still be calling me Linny Pooh. Story 35. A friend of mine, who isn't American, couldn't remember Skittles in a game of Jeopardy where the clue was the slogan, "Taste the Rainbow." As a result, people called him Skittles for a year. Story 36. I was being punished for something I didn't do, but I had to sit outside at camp in the middle of the night during winter with a blanket. I was nicknamed Ewok forever. Story 37. Not me, but a girl in my high school got the nickname Geyser Girl after a party where she discovered her limit and exceeded it eruptively. Story 38. During my freshman year of high school, our marching band was invited to perform in a parade at Disney, so we flew to Florida for a week. On the second to last day, I started my period during a Blue Man Group show, and a male friend walked me to a bathroom at Universal Studios. I asked him to tell our group to stop and wait if they passed by before I was finished. It took about 5 to 10 minutes to clean up, but by the time I exited, they were all gone. I tried to find my way back to where the buses were in the parking garage, but when I got there, I couldn't locate them. They were 3 floors down, and I had no idea where I was. They couldn't hear me shouting, so I watched the 3 buses pull out and leave for the hotel. I sat next to the information booth in the park for a few hours, terrified and with no way to contact anyone. My phone had died, and when I asked the ladies in the booth if I could charge it, they informed me that charging was not allowed due to safety reasons and suggested I find a charging station in the park. This was around 11 p.m. I hadn't eaten since 10 a.m., and it was freezing since it was February. Around 12:30 a.m., a security guard approached me and asked, "Are you my name?" I was taken to the parking lot, where my teachers were waiting for me with a rental car, as the park and hotel refused to provide shuttling at that late hour. They didn't realize I was missing until 5 different kids mentioned that I wasn't there. This concern had been raised from the moment the buses pulled away, but they were told not to worry since I was assumed to be on one of the buses. At 1 a.m., we finally returned to the hotel, where I got to call my mom, eat an entire small pizza by myself, and have an extra 2-liter bottle of soda in my room since my bunkmates were genuinely worried sick about me. The next day, we were at Animal Kingdom, and the majorette instructor gave me a set of Finding Nemo-themed pins. She said, "Since we lost you and you're just a little fish, I thought you'd enjoy a Nemo pin." The name stuck. Forever Nemo, lost and found again. Summary: I got left behind at Universal Studios on a school trip and earned the name Nemo, as I was lost and found. Story 39. Mater. I said I'm mater, like toe mater but without the toe. This happened at my dad's funeral when people would ask me what my name was, and I was 2 years old. Story 40. A couple of years ago, I was taking a hot pound cake out of the oven to place on a cooling rack when my oven mitt slipped, and I dropped it on the floor. My friends quickly dubbed me floor cake. Later, we had fleas enter the house, likely due to having several feral cats in the neighborhood. I was getting bitten by those fleas, which earned me another nickname, Flea Bath. Story 41. I was called Vegemite in high school. I have an eating disorder known as avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, although it wasn't identified as such at the time. I had an extremely limited range of safe foods. I was dared by some kids to ask for a Vegemite sandwich at a Subway, but I didn't do it. Despite this, people started spreading the rumor anyway, and it stuck for a few years. Story 42. Day 1 at the new job. I approached the open door, pulled the handle down, and then pushed it. I slammed full speed into the door, face first. I insisted to the team who witnessed this that I had pulled the handle down before pushing. They showed me that the handle was purely decorative and did not engage the latch. I had walked into a door that opened freely. A few weeks later, I was sitting in my chair. It was an old chair used long before I arrived. I leaned back too far, and the chair suddenly fell apart in a way I still cannot explain. All anyone saw was me on the floor, surrounded by chair parts. A few more weeks later, I was telling a story about how I use Heelys to navigate airports, as they are not technically banned like skateboards and roller skates. My colleagues laughed at the idea of a grown adult using Heelys. The next day, I wore them to work. As I was leaving, a colleague yelled out the window, "Skate to your car." It wasn't my first experience with Heelys. However, embarrassingly, as I raised my toes, the wheel caught on something, and the whole office watched me fall. Finally, I called in to let them know I wouldn't be in that day due to my car having an unfortunate incident with a ditch, making it unusable. My Mexican colleague would yell "El accident" each time. Story 43. Bacardi socks. I fell over in a pair of oversized borrowed socks. I happened to be drinking and got accused of being drunk instead of just clumsy. Story 44. I didn't do anything other than hit a double on the ball field. I went by my last name for sports, and my teammate tried to yell, "Way to go," combining my first and last name. It stuck all the way through college. Story 45, these are great. I was working the night shift at a nursing home with a male nurse. I tried to roll my desk chair while sitting in it from one side of the nurse's station to the other. The wheel got stuck, and I ended up on the floor. That nurse called me Grace for as long as he worked there, and by the time he left, other staff members were also calling me Grace because I had none. I didn't get rid of that nickname until I left that job. Sadly, this was not the only time I fell out of an office chair, but it was the only time I got a nickname from it. Story 46. In the deaf community, people create a sign to go with their name so they don't have to fingerspell it every time. I took the liberty of cutting all my hair off when I was 5 years old, and to this day, my sign name is the scissors sign across the forehead, mimicking the action of cutting hair. Story 47. My nephew's nickname is Spike because his parents took a long time to name him after he was born, about 3 days. His granddad said, "You better name that kid something soon, or I'm going to start calling him Spike." The nickname stuck, but nobody calls him that except family. His real name ended up being a long, complicated Irish name, named after his dad but with Junior at the end. It was funny when Spike was growing up because his school called him by his legal name. He would receive awards in kindergarten that read, "John had a good music day today." I would then tease his dad about it, patting him on the head and saying, "Oh, good for you, John." Story 48. I refer to someone I know as his orangeness because of his artificial tan and his desperate desire to be a leader. Story 49. It's rare, but I still hear it sometimes. Mare. It's because I put another nickname of mine, Juju. My name is Jewel. I'm not Jewish. In a text editor that lets you flip and reverse letters. Story 50. My first book was The Saga of Punk Walrus, based on a character from short stories I created at science fiction conventions in the 1980s. My bulletin board system handle became Punk Walrus. My friend Liska called me Punky in a chat room one day, and it stuck. Now, about half my friends call me that, especially the older ones or their kids who knew me as Uncle Punky and still call me that as an adult. I'd say it's a 50-50 split over the years. Story 51. I was an overly excitable kid, and one night my family decided to get McDonald's for dinner. In my excitement, I ran towards a set of double doors that were normally automatic. I slammed face first into the door handles and ended up with 2 black eyes. That Monday at school, I was dubbed Panda. Story 52. My friends call me because, back in high school, I casually mentioned that British Knights were cool. Story 53. I accidentally told my cheer team that a bully called me Katie McQueef, which was very similar to my last name. As a result, I was called Queef throughout high school. Editing to add that it was mostly out of love. Story 54. I have a large head, which makes finding beanies that actually fit difficult. They tend to ride up and make my ears stick out. One night, I was at the races with my boss, his wife, and another coworker, all smoking and drinking in the car trailer. My coworker said to me, "Go into those trees and get me some cookies." I knew it would stick immediately. I am not a Keebler elf. Story 55. Back as a freshman in high school, I always held the door open for people, primarily for my theater class, as our teacher was often running late and my classmates gathered by the doors. Eventually, people started saying, "Thanks, doorman," and the nickname stuck. It got to the point where half of my friends' parents didn't even know my real name. Story 56. I babysat frequently in middle school and high school, even at my church. Little kids often struggle with pronouncing the 2 L's in my name or leave them out altogether. I became known as Maui. Anytime any church members or friends in my babysitting circle saw something related to Maui, I received a picture. I have seen Maui shoes, Maui from Moana, and even a church friend's daughter on the island of Maui. I have yet to visit the island that shares my name. Story 57. My cousin, who is also a good friend, called and asked me what my middle name was. I thought I would have some fun, so I told her it was Juanita. Although we are not Hispanic, she knew my middle initial was J. She thanked me and hung up without explaining why she needed my middle name. The next day, I asked her about it, and she told me it was for some legal papers at the attorney's office. I felt so bad. I told her that wasn't really my middle name and that I would pay if the paperwork needed to be changed. I have told the story a few times, and now many of my cousin's friends call me Juanita. Story 58. Two-Sip Tony. I threw up at a high school party after just 2 sips of a wine cooler. I wasn't even drunk. My stomach just disagreed. It's been a decade, and people still ask if I want my sippy cup. Side note, my name is not even remotely close to Tony. Story 59. A new employee spilled a cup of water on his first day. Another employee joked about getting him a sippy cup. They still call him Sippy Cup over 15 years later. Story 60. Not so much a nickname, but somewhat related. I nearly died once by going over a waterfall. Ever since, my friends love sneakily playing waterfalls whenever they can, including dedicating it to be played for me at weddings and on jukeboxes. I also receive a lot of Niagara Falls postcards and gifts from them. Story 61. I don't sit down and watch things, so I haven't seen many movies and shows, and I often fail to recognize famous names. One could say I live under a rock. Story 62. I did everything to get a nickname. I grabbed any chance to have one. I was called Cowl, from Shira, Uncle Fester. I'm basically him in nature, and Speedo. I love each of them, but this is not how nicknames work, right? They tend to stick if you dislike them. So, I never really had a nickname. Story 63. Not me, but my dad's coworker. Years ago, when the coworker was a new hire, he introduced himself to a group of blue-collar dads who were already friends. They often teased each other and he told them not to call him Weems, a nickname based on his last name. Since that day, his nickname has firmly been Weems. I don't even know his first name. Story 64. I once sat on a tack that shot up in the air like a cartoon character. Everyone was laughing at me, and I was about 5 years old at the time. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a hammer, and declared in my little voice that anyone who laughed at me was going to get the hammer. Now, my nickname is Hammer. Story 65. If my mistake was furrowing my brow too much as a baby, since I was just shy and full of anxiety, then that mistake resulted in storm clouds. My family still calls me that to this day. Story 66. I feel bad about this, but I gave a nickname to a girl in my class. We were arguing, and she became quite nasty, trying to provoke me. I said she looked like a toad. Everyone went silent for a moment, and another kid said, "You do look like a toad." She had a cartoonish frog-like face with some acne and glasses. The nickname stuck, and eventually everyone in the school, including the teachers, called her Toad. Story 67. My primary nickname is Spooky. I wouldn't describe my interests as weird or silly. Rather, for 20 years, I have been deeply fascinated by spooky themes, and it has come to define me in a more endearing way. Story 68. At summer school, we learned about life in ancient times, and one of the things taught was hygiene or the lack thereof compared to now. Our class of 9 decided for the rest of the summer camp to try to live as in the days of old, including not showering. Probably worse than not showering was brushing our teeth with charcoal, but not showering in the middle of the Australian summer quickly made things quite unpleasant. I was the last holdout after 2 weeks. The movie American Pie had just come out that year. My name from then on and forevermore has been Yeti. Some people don't actually know my real name, and I love it. Story 69. My mom said I was terrible at dancing growing up until I heard the song Zara Zara Touch Me. Ever since then, Zara has been my nickname. Story 70. I liked a classmate in 8th grade, and he confessed to me as a joke. I got so nervous that I put a box I was working with on my head and ran to the bathroom. Story 71. Does it count if it was technically my parents' mistake? My parents always joked that I was the only thing that happened in Vegas that didn't stay in Vegas because there's an idea that I was conceived there. Thus, my nickname, popularized by my husband, was Vegas. Story 72. I killed a squirrel that had taken up residence in my attic. I'm not the leader of the squirrel gang. Story 73. I was obsessed with going to Skipper's as a kid, a fish restaurant in the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to eat there daily. My grandparents started calling me Fish, and it stuck. An uncle I didn't meet until I was an adult even knew about it. All my extended family on my dad's side refers to me as Fish. My ex-husband loved it and tried to get all of our nieces and nephews to call me Aunt Fishy, but thankfully it didn't stick. Story 74. During my senior year of high school, I made an observation in science class that something looked like a bunch of noodles. Naturally, as kids do, I have been called Noodles or Nuds for short for the past 20 years. Story 75. Not a mistake, but I wear sunglasses everywhere due to my light-sensitive eyes. Therefore, I use the suffix inatter as my online handle. Story 76. This isn't my mistake. I was talking to a cousin, and we were debating business. He pointed at me and said, "Let's say your name is, I don't know, Galapagos or something." I responded, "Galapagos? You couldn't think of an actual name, like Sandy or Jane." The name stuck because it was so unusual, and now I occasionally get people calling me Galapagos. Story 77. A friend shared a story about a high school classmate who was teased for having hair in an unusual place. Locally, this was referred to as Bernick. As a result, the nickname Bernie developed, even though his real name was nothing like Bernie. Story 78. Completely unrelated to the prompt, but when I was 12, my little brother was starting to learn how to talk. He couldn't pronounce my name and instead said, "een," pronounced an A. It has been 20 years, and my entire family still calls me that, except for my dad and siblings. Story 79. Miss Sandals. We were at an amusement park with my family when I was between 12 and 14 years old. It started to rain a little, so we went to a restaurant to eat something. My parents ordered Sandals beers. The waiter came with glasses, tripped, and accidentally poured the beers on me. I was soaked. The waiter panicked and started to apologize, but my dad just laughed and said, "Well, you weren't baptized, but you are now. Maybe we should call you Miss Sandals." We all laughed about it, and the waiter smiled too. The nickname stuck and became my gamertag for years. I later changed it to find more friends from my own country, but I still sometimes hear people call me Miss Sandals. Story 80. Reminds me of that old joke. So a man walks into a bar and sits down. He starts a conversation with an older gentleman next to him. The older gentleman has obviously had a few drinks. He says to the man, "You see that dock out there? I built it myself, handcrafted each piece, and it's the best dock in town. But do they call me McGregor the dock builder? No. And you see that bridge over there? I built that. It took me 2 months, through rain, sleet, and scorching weather. But do they call me McGregor the bridge builder? No. And you see that pier over there? I built that. It's the best pier in the county. But do they call me McGregor the pier builder? No." The older gentleman looks around, makes sure that nobody is listening, leans towards the man, and says, "But you mess with one sheep." Story 81. In high school biology class, we were studying human anatomy and I, in my youthful wisdom, mispronounced femur as femare. It was quite the spectacle. Everyone laughed hysterically and my face turned a shade of red that would put a ripe tomato to shame. From that day forward, in the eyes of my classmates and even some teachers, I became femare. The nickname stuck with me through college, as some high school friends were also my college mates. Now, years later, when I encounter old friends, they still greet me with a cheerful, "Hey, femare." It's a silly, embarrassing memory that always makes me laugh. I now work as a physiotherapist, so the irony is not lost on me. Story 82. As a kid, I was notoriously known as the clumsy one. It seemed like every time I visited family, I would inevitably break something. That's how Wreck-It Ryan was born. Story 83. My brother had a cyst in his scrotum and had to go to the hospital because it was so severe. I alternate between calling him 3 balls and bonus balls. Story 84. Mine resulted in it becoming my actual name. I went by a different name, let's say Lily, instead of my real name online for privacy. My ex and I would talk on Discord, And before I met his parents, he asked me which name I preferred. I said Lily, not thinking much about it. When I met his parents, they called me Lily, and I still vividly remember that moment of confusion and realization. Then, when I met his friends, I was introduced as Lily. When I made new friends who also became friends with him, he called me Lily. I started university with these friends and my ex, so to avoid any confusion, I introduced myself to people there as Lily. By that point, I was in too deep to change things, so I've just stayed Lily. Story 85. Oh, I tripped over absolutely nothing at a family gathering and face planted straight into the cake. Now I'm known as Cake Face forever. Every birthday and every celebration, there's always someone asking, "Hey, Cake Face, do you want a slice?" It's a memorable moment I'll never live down. Story 86. My eldest brother's nickname in high school was Hilly. My second eldest brother's nickname was Silly Hilly. As the last and only female, their friends called me Little Silly Hilly. Story 87. I always wanted a nickname like Tom, the guy who bakes awesome sourdough, or Tom, the guy who fixed the town church steeple with his bare hands. But no, you get caught having an encounter with one sheep. Story 88. My grandfather always called me Sticky Bum because I was always pulling my underwear out of my butt. He had a name for all of us grandkids. Story 89. Back in high school, I once confidently walked into the wrong classroom and sat through half the lecture before realizing it was advanced Spanish, a subject I hadn't even taken. Ever since that day, a few friends still call me Confuso. Story 90. I dislike people who use the terms daddy and mommy in a sexual context. I may have previously shared a few memes about golden showers. As a result, I was called Piss Daddy. I resented it and requested a change. Now I am referred to as Piss Mommy or PM, which also happens to be my actual initials, so I embrace that. Story 91. When I was a toddler, I would run around singing, "Put a Little Boogie in It," and dancing. I still enjoy boogieing to this day. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.